My name is Laura Bennett, and I was 34 years old the day I learned that the house I had called my own for 11 years was no longer mine. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind that feels safe without asking for proof. The sky was pale. The air was still, and everything looked exactly the way it always had. I stood in my kitchen, holding a chipped mug my mother had given me years ago, the smell of coffee rising gently, as if nothing in the world was about to change, but something had already changed, and I just did not know it yet. My phone buzzed against the counter, a small sound that did not feel important until I answered it. A voice on the other side spoke calmly, asking for me by name, then asking about my house. The words that followed did not land all at once. They came slowly, like something breaking. Far away, the property had been sold 3 weeks ago, the man said, and for a moment I thought I had misheard because the sentence did not belong in my life. My fingers tightened around the phone as I tried to understand. Sold, I repeated, and even to myself it sounded wrong. He continued, speaking with the same professional tone, explaining details that only made the situation worse. The sale had been authorized under the name Daniel Bennett, my brother. The room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the ground had moved without warning. Daniel, the same brother who had helped me move into that house, the same brother who had laughed with me over small mistakes and promised that we would always have each other's backs. I stood there, unable to move as the call ended, leaving behind a silence that pressed against my ears. I placed the mug on the counter slowly, as if any sudden movement might shatter whatever was left of my understanding of reality. 3 weeks. I had been living there for 3 weeks without knowing it was no longer mine. The thought settled into my chest, heavy and cold. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the house, locking the door out of habit. Even though the meaning of that action had already changed, the drive felt strange. The roads were familiar, but distant, like I was watching them from somewhere else. When I reached the property office, I stepped inside and asked for information, my voice sounding steady, even though I could feel something inside me slipping. The woman at the desk typed for a moment before her expression shifted, and she called someone else. A man in a dark suit came forward, holding a file, and asked me to follow him into a small office where the air felt too still. He opened the file and placed the papers in front of me, and that was when I saw it. My address printed clearly on the page beneath it, a signature that looked like mine but was not. I knew my own handwriting. I knew the small details that made it real, and this one was wrong. I told him it was not mine, and he nodded, explaining that the documents had appeared valid, including proof that my brother had been added as co-owner years earlier. The words echoed in my mind, co-owner. I had never agreed to that. I had never signed anything like that. Yet there it was, printed in ink, as if it had always been true. 5 years ago, Daniel had attached himself to my home without my knowledge, and now he had taken everything. I felt something inside me fracture, not loudly but deeply, like a quiet crack spreading through something that once felt solid. I asked for copies of every document, and when I stepped outside, the sunlight felt harsher than before, almost unreal. I held the folder tightly, knowing that what was inside it was more than paper. It was proof of something I could not ignore anymore. The house I had loved was no longer a place. It was a story that had been rewritten without me, and somewhere out there, my brother was living his life as if nothing had happened. But I could feel it clearly now. Something had shifted inside me, something that would not let this end quietly. I drove back to the house and sat in the driveway for a long moment, staring at the front door, the same door I had walked through 1,000 times. It looked the same, but it did not feel the same anymore. I stepped out of the car and walked up to it, slowly unlocking it again, as if I needed to prove to myself that I still could. The inside of the house greeted me with the same familiar silence, but now it felt different. Like it no longer belonged to me. The walls that once held comfort now felt like witnesses to something I had not seen. I walked through each room, touching small things that carried memories. The table in the corner, the window where I used to sit, the hallway where that old dent still remained. Everything was still there, but the meaning had changed. I sat down in the living room holding the folder in my lap, and began to go through the documents one by one, forcing myself to read every line, every signature, every date, each page. Revealed another layer of the truth. Daniel had planned this carefully. Over time he had created a version of reality where he had control and I had none. My chest tightened as I realized how long this had been happening, how long I had been unaware. The betrayal was not sudden, it was built slowly, piece by piece, and now I was only seeing the final result. I leaned back and closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing, but the thoughts would not stop. Questions flooded my mind. How had he done this? Why had he done this? And why had I not seen it sooner? I opened my eyes again and looked around the room, knowing that whatever this place had been to me before, it was something else now. It was no longer just a home, it was evidence of trust broken in a way that could not be undone. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. Everything outside continued as if nothing had changed. Cars passed, people walked by, and the world moved forward without noticing that mine had stopped for a moment. I pressed my hand against the glass, feeling its cool surface grounding me slightly. I knew then that I could not stay frozen in this moment. I could not let confusion and hurt be the end of this story. Daniel had made his move, but I had not made mine yet. I turned away from the window and looked at the folder. Again, a steady resolve forming beneath the shock. This was not over, not even close. I would find out everything. I would understand every step he had taken, and I would confront him, not just for the house, but for everything he had taken, without asking. I picked up my phone and stared at his name for a long moment, before locking the screen again. I was not ready to call him yet, not until I knew more, not until I could face him without breaking. The house was quiet around me, but inside my mind, something had already begun to move, something stronger than fear, something sharper than pain, the beginning of a fight I had never expected to have, but now could not avoid. And as I stood there in the place that used to be my home, I understood one thing. Clearly, this was only the beginning. Laura Bennett did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with the folder open in front of her, while the house stayed silent around her, like it was holding its breath. She read every document again and again, until the words stopped feeling like information and started feeling like evidence of a life being taken apart without permission. Her brother Daniel's name appeared everywhere, like a shadow that had been quietly growing for years, in places she never thought to look. Authorization, signature, legal, representative. Each word felt heavier than the last morning. She had stopped shaking, not because she felt calm, but because shock had started turning into something else, something colder and more. Made coffee, but did not drink it. She just held the mug and stared at the documents spread across the table, trying to build a timeline in her mind, trying to understand. When this had started thirst pattern, she noticed was times MLL changes over months, things she had dismissed at the time as family help or convenience. Daniel offering to store documents. Daniel suggesting she add his name for emergency situations. Daniel helping with bank discussions. She had trusted him because trust was the language of their family. No, she saw it differently. It had not been help, it had been preparation. Her phone rang again, and this time she already knew who it would be. Before she looked at Anil's answered, but did not speak first. This voice came through, calm and controlled, as if nothing had changed. Asked if she had reviewed everything. Laura kept her eyes on the papers and said yes. There was a short pause, then Daniel said he hoped she understood now that this was not personal. That word, personal, felt almost insulting. Laura asked him how taking someone's home without consent could ever not be told. Daniel sighed like she was missing something. Obvious, said the house had been underutilized, that she was financially stretched, and that this arrangement had stabilized assets for both of them. Laura stood up slowly. She asked him when he decided that her life required stabilizing. His tone shifted slightly, now less patient. Said she always resisted structure, and that she was reacting emotionally instead of logically. Thought sentence did something inside her. It removed the last illusion that this was a misunderstandings. was not confusion, this was justifications. Ended the call without another word for a few minutes. She just stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at nothing, until her thoughts settled into one clear direction. She needed answers outside of him. She needed proof beyond his version of events. Opened her laptop and searched for legal firms specializing in property fraud and identity disputes, and one name kept appearing again and again: Victor Haley, a lawyer known for cases that involved family betrayal, financial manipulation, and forged ownership transfer. She called his office immediately. Lithy scheduled her for the next morning. Day moved slowly after that, every hour stretching longer than it should have. She stayed inside the house, but it no longer felt like a place of comfort. It felt like a space she was temporarily occupying. One point she walked through every room again, but this time she was not remembering. She was observing. She noticed things differently now, small details she had never questioned before: documents stored in shared spaces, conversations Daniel had insisted on having in person, small reassurances he had given her about paperwork. They were no longer memories, they were pieces of a structure she had not seen being built. By the time evening came, she had stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like a witness to her own life. Next morning, she went to Victor Hale's office. The building was older than she expected, quiet and slightly worn, like a place that had seen so many complicated stories. Victor Hale was not what she expected either. He did not waste time on sympathy or reassurance. He simply asked for everything. She placed the folder on his desk, opened it slowly, and began reading without interruption. For a long time, the only sound in the room was paper turning thin. He leaned back slightly, asked her one question. Did you last personally sign anything related to ownership changes? Laura thought about it and realized the answer was never. Victor nodded, slowly told her what she was dealing with was not just property transfer, it was layered identity authorization, abuse potentially involving forged consent, and long-term manipulation of legal access. She said it was serious but not unfixable, but it would not be explained that cases like this required tracing every transaction, every authorization, every witness, and every communication over years. And most importantly, he said she should prepare for resistance from family members who believed they were justified. Laura listened carefully for the first time. Since that morning, she felt something other than confusion or shocks, felt direction. Victor asked her if she was ready for what would happen once this started. She said yes without hesitation. Bess, now she understood something clear. This was not just about a house. This was about erasing control someone had taken from her life, piece by piece, and she was no longer going to let it continue. As she left the office, Victor's final words followed her. Said, "Once you start this, there is no going back to the old version of your family." Laura stepped outside into the daylight and understood exactly what he meant. Becco's somewhere between that kitchen and this moment, she had already crossed a line she could not uncross, and Daniel had no idea yet that the story he thought he had finished was only beginning to turn against him. Laura Bennett left Victor's office with a heavy sense of clarity that cut through all the confusion she had felt before. The sun outside felt brighter, but not warmer. It felt like a day that did not care what she had just learned, and she hated that life continued normally around her, while she felt like she stood in the center of something collapsing. She walked toward her car and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, without starting the engine. Her hand rested on the key, but her mind was not in the present. It was replaying every conversation with Daniel, every moment that had felt normal, but was now distorted into proof of betrayal. She finally started the car and drove with no real destination, just away from silence, from the house, from the version of her life that no longer belonged to her. While driving, she kept saying to herself that Victor said it was fixable, but the word fixable felt dangerous because it implied that first everything would have to be broken, opened completely before it could be repaired. She pulled into a small parking lot near the lake. The water was still and quiet, but her mind was not. As she sat there, She opened her laptop again and began writing everything from the beginning, this time in chronological order. When she first noticed Daniel becoming more involved, when she started seeing his name on bank-related communications, things she had ignored because she trusted him. Family does not do this was what she used to tell herself over and over, but she did not believe that anymore. She called Victor again. This time she asked him what Daniel would need to do this legally. Victor paused and then explained that if documents had been forged over years, it meant access had been granted step by step through small permissions, not one-time large fraud. It was layered and patient, and that was what made it dangerous. It was not an accident, it was architecture. Laura asked him if this meant others could be involved. Victor said possibly, but family cases like this usually had one central planner. Laura went silent because now the picture was becoming clearer. And that clarity was worse than confusion because it gave this crime intent. After the call, she started checking her own bank account history more carefully, something she had not done with fear before because she had no reason to doubt herself. She found small transactions that did not make sense. Consultation fees, administrative charges, processing adjustments, names of services she had never heard of, all linked through systems she had never approved. Each one was small enough to be ignored individually, but together they formed a pattern that made her stomach turn. She closed the laptop and sat back in the car seat, feeling for the first time that Daniel had not just taken her house, he had been mapping her entire life system from inside while making her believe everything was normal. That evening, she did not go home. Instead, she drove to a small hotel near the town. She checked into a room and locked the door, then for an hour just sat on the bed staring at the wall, feeling the weight of everything settle around her, like a consequence she could no longer avoid. Her phone rang. It was Daniel again. This time, she answered immediately but did not speak first. Daniel's voice came calm but slightly less controlled this time. He asked if she had spoken to anyone about the property. Laura did not answer directly. Instead, she asked him why he still believed he was right to do this. Daniel said again that he was protecting her from financial instability, and that if she stopped resisting, this would be solved quickly. Laura laughed once, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of his confidence finally broke her silence. She said his name and then asked him clearly if he ever asked her whether she wanted any of this. Silence followed. This was the first time she heard uncertainty in him. Daniel tried to redirect the conversation. He asked if Victor Hale had told her what kind of legal battle this would become, if she really understood what she was starting. Laura said she understood perfectly, and then she hung up. This time, without hesitation. After that moment, there was a change in her. It was not anger alone, it was focus. As if the emotion had finally stopped scattering and became a straight line of intention. She no longer looked at the situation as family betrayal. She looked at it as a case, constructed, and that shift changed everything. The next morning, Victor called her and said he had found something important. There was a missing consent verification on one of the earliest documents, something that should have been legally required but was not properly witnessed. She would need to review original filings physically, not digital copies. Laura did not ask questions, she just agreed. And for the first time in weeks, she did not feel like she was reacting anymore. She was moving forward. Laura did not go home after Victor Hale's warning. She could not bring herself to return to a place that now felt like evidence rather than shelter. Instead, she stayed in motion. Driving through quiet streets without a clear destination, her thoughts no longer scattered the way they had in the beginning. Now everything inside her was beginning to align into a single, uncomfortable truth. Daniel was not reacting to events, he was managing them, and that meant he was still ahead of her. So parked near a small roadside cafe and sat inside without ordering anything, her laptop open in front of her. Victor had sent new files. Marked urgent, she clicked them slowly, and what she saw made her freezer were communications between bank, intermediaries, property agents, and a consulting entity she had never heard of. But what caught her attention was not just the network, it was the timing. Every major transaction in her case aligned with specific dates when she had been out of town, or distracted or unavailable. It was not random, it was coordinated. Laura whispered to herself that someone had been watching her pattern. Her phone vibrated, and this time it was not Daniel. It was a number she did not recognize. She answered cautiously. Woman's voice came through calm and direct, asking if she was Laura Bennett. Laura confirmed it. Analyst from a financial institution involved in one of the transactions. Laura straightened immediately. Woman continued carefully, saying there had been irregular authorization trails linked to multiple accounts associated with Daniel Bennett's name, and that her name had appeared as secondary linked identity access on several forms. Laura felt her stomach drops, asked what that meant. Woman hesitated before answering that someone had likely used a shared identity framework to bypass verification layers, meaning Daniel may have expanded access not just through property documents but through financial identity linkage systems. Laura closed her eyes for a sec. This was no longer just about a house or even money, it was about identity overlap, something far more invisible. When the call ended, Laura sat in silence for a long time. The cafe around her continued normally. People laughed, coffee machines hissed, conversations flowed, but she felt completely separated from it. Alsh reopened Victor's files and sent him a message asking for immediate meeting. Within an hour, she was back in his office. Victor looked at her and immediately understood something had escalated. Laura placed her phone on the table and relayed the call word for word. Victor did not interrupt until she finished it. He leaned back slowly and said, "This is now beyond property fraud." Laura asked him how far beyond. Victor answered carefully, identity convergence, exploitation. Laura frowned. Victor explained that when someone gains layered access across property, financial accounts, and identity verification systems, they can effectively operate under a merged control profile without immediate detection. Laura felt her hands go cold. So Daniel was not just taking assets, he was integrating control over her entire financial identity structure. Victor is more, he added, turned his monitor toward Heron. The screen were flagged entries showing attempted access into another account, one she had not used in years but still existed under her legal identity. Laura read the label, slowly. Readerment trust linkage. Akanshi looked at Victor, confirmed that someone had attempted to reroute dormant funds tied to her identity profile. Laura whispered his name, Daniel. Victor did not deny it, but he also did not confirm it directly. Instead, he said patterns point to a single orchestrator, but confirmation requires deeper forensic tracing. Laura stood up, pacing. Slow. Is not stopping, she said. Victor replied no, and that is what makes this dangerous. Laura turned sharply. Then why am I still waiting? Met her eyes. Because once we trigger full legal exposure, he will respond immediately and aggressively. Laura stopped, pacing. What kind of response? Victor paused. Financial concealment, escalation, identity defense, counterclaims, possibly falsified counter evidence. Laura felt a sharp realization he is going to fight back. Victor nodded yes, and he will not do it emotionally, he will do it strategically. Sills filled the room again. Laura sat down slowly. For the first time she understood the real structure of the conflict. Daniel had not just stolen from her, he had built defenses around it. Their phone buzzed again. This time, it was Daniel. Victor watched her carefully. Laura did not answer immediately, looked at the screen for a long moment, then finally picked up. Daniel's voice was different this time, calmer, but sharper, controlled in a way that felt rehearsed. Asked if she was speaking to investigators, Laura did not deny Ether was a Pausathan. Daniel said, "You are making a mistake, escalating this." Laura replied, "I am correcting Idenother." Pausathan, Daniel said quietly. "You do not understand what you are opening," Laura responded. "I understand more than you think." Daniel's tone changed slightly. not anger yet but something close to concern. Mixed with calculation, said, "This is bigger than you and me." Laura replied, "It became about us the moment you took my name without a skinslance again." Daniel said, "If you continue, Victor, Hale will not be able to control what happens next." Laura's grip tightened on the phone. Asked what that meant, Daniel did not answer directly. Instead, he said, "Stop now, and I can still minimize damage." Laura closed her eyes for a second, then she said, "Noned," hung up the room. Felt heavier after that call. Victor asked what he said. Laura looked at him and said, "He is preparing something." Victor nodded slowly. "That is what I expected." Laura asked, "How long before he moves?" Victor replied, "Not long." Laura sat back, realizing the next phase was not investigation anymore. It was confrontation. Daniel had already started positioning himself for it.